Good morning. Well, it's morning. I don't know if when people are listening to this, it'll be morning for them, but welcome to the Legacy Years podcast, where we talk about all things related to aging and we try to provide tips and tricks to age well. And I'm excited to have today's guest, Shaneka Baylor. Now, I'm going to say some things that come after your name. I don't know that I know what they are, but maybe we'll learn what they are. You're a PharmD and an MSNW, and you bring a unique blend of medical and nutritional knowledge to the conversation. And we're going to talk today about helping older adults live well and longer by eating well. And so thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me this morning or whatever time of day it is where people are watching.
Exactly. Exactly. So tell us a little bit about that. What is a PharmD and an MSNW? What do those things stand for?
Okay, so a PharmD is a doctor of pharmacy. So I got my doctor of pharmacy all the way back in the early 2000s, in 2008. And so I've been a pharmacist since then. And then an MSNW is a Master's of Science in Nutrition and Wellness. And so back in 2021, I graduated with that Master's in Nutrition and Wellness. So I went back and got an in-depth look at nutrition, wellness, and how what we eat and the foods we eat affect our bodies, and then also how total wellness can affect us. So I didn't want to just look at regular foods, but how how wellness impacts us as well.
So we have quite the expert, it sounds like. And I am glad that you have, you know, been willing to come on here today and share your knowledge. So I do hope that this helps folks. I hope I get some tips and tricks because I'm certainly not the most nutritionally balanced person. Let's just say that. So let's talk a little bit about just the realities of nutrition as we age. So I do know, that becomes even more important as we age,
Yes.
but you know, how do those nutritional needs change later in life?
So there's a lot of different things that happen. We need to increase our protein because we start to lose our muscle mass as we age. So, we're going to definitely look for quality, even over quantity. So, our appetites change. Some of us, our older adults, are going to start taking more medications. So, that's definitely going to shrink their appetites. So that's why I'm saying quality over quantity. So what we're eating, we're going to really want to look at what foods we're putting in. So looking at those protein amounts, looking at certain vitamin and nutrients that we're putting in. So getting certain minerals, our calcium, our vitamin D, so looking at those kind of things, getting our water in, making sure our fluids, because also, again, our thirst perceptions change, and a lot of the medicines that they're taking, they're going to make sure they're needing to flush those things out. And even the foods that we're eating, making sure we're getting all those things through our bodies. So those are the biggest things, getting those vitamins, minerals, and proteins, and getting them in good quantity, but making sure that the quality is there. So I always start with, getting it. If you can get it in several meals a day, that's good. But if you can't, making sure you're getting the best qualities.
Got it. So, as we see those gaps in nutrition, how would that show in someone's day to day life? How would they know, oh, I'm not getting enough of whatever? What are some things that people should watch out for?
So sometimes you're not gonna see it every day unless you're,
Yeah.
Getting those annual checkups with your doctors, and then, you're checking their blood work. And then of course they'll be able to show, like, if you have, low iron levels, or, maybe your kidney function. So some of the blood work will show some of your vitamin and mineral numbers are down. Thirst wise, if you're saying I'm always thirsty, then you'll know that you're needing more water. Protein wise, if you're noticing that your skin is sagging, or you're just, and you don't have the muscle tone, if you're having a hard time doing activities and you're just really tired all the time, you need to build a little bit more muscle. So it can show up in that kind of day-to-day activity, that you just don't have the energy to do the things that you used to do. Some of that is because you might be lacking the vitamins and the minerals and the protein that you need.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And some people, I think, just chalk that up to, oh, I'm aging. That's just part of
Mm-hmm.
aging, but it doesn't have to be.
it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's because you're not getting the foods that you need to help to increase that energy and that stamina so that you can, do those activities of daily living that you need to be
Yeah.
doing.
So I think one of the other things that, we see and that people say is if I'm only cooking for one or two, sometimes that is harder to do. People who've, they've, it just doesn't matter. It's just me.
Yeah.
Why is that such a challenge for people, both physically, emotionally, financially, even? Because it can be even more expensive to cook for just one.
Yeah, I think, when you think about, so if we'll just say if somebody had a big family, and then they go down to one person, they don't know how to cook for one person because they were always used to cooking for several people. So, to go for cooking for a family of four to try to cook for one person, they say, how do I go, and buy one tomato? Or, they don't, in their mind,
Yeah.
there's no way to just go do that, so they haven't mentally imagined how to do that. Or, again, we're talking about our older adults. So, they came from a time when, you bought in bulk or, you finish everything that's on your plate. So if you're buying all these foods, then you cook it and you eat everything that you prepared. So, you don't want to waste what you've cooked. And so,
Yeah.
if you're buying that and you're spending an amount of money, you don't want to waste what you've cooked. So, it's a very hard thing. Even for me, it took me a while to figure out how to like cook just for me. It's not just an older person thing. You have to figure out how to process that, buy enough, or when you're younger, we've learned how to prep cook for a whole week so that we can eat everything, Monday through Friday. And your older adults are not going to go buy enough food and cook in the kitchen for 7 days or 5 days of food. So it's
Yeah.
harder for them, because they cooked every day. So they're not going to the grocery store. So I think it's harder for them to wrap their minds around sometimes about going to the store, buying their groceries, and then cooking enough food to last maybe 3 days or 4 days. They're thinking you're going to cook it and then you have to eat it that day, and you cook and you eat the next day, and then you cook and you eat the next day. And so the mentality is like, I'm not going to go cook every day. So it's just easier to either make a sandwich or order something or just not really eat than trying to prepare that. Or, you have the others who never really cooked. And so again, then they're just not gonna, that's not a concern because I didn't cook it
Yeah.
and I'm not gonna learn how to cook now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in our family, anyone who knows me knows that my husband does the cooking. So I know I would struggle with that if, you know, I didn't have somebody who did that for me.
Hmm.
And I see a lot of older adults, unfortunately, doing things like going through fast food because it's easy, it's quick. And sometimes it's cheaper than the grocery store,
Yeah.
so that cost is certainly a factor for them too. And I don't know which is worse, not eating or eating a sandwich or, going through, a fast food restaurant. So
Well,
I,
it's cheaper on
the
the back.
struggle
It's
is
cheaper on
real.
the front end, but not on the back end because the health consequences of eating that fast food is going to catch up with you. So you're going to pay for it in healthcare costs on the back
Uh
end.
huh. I think that is such a good thing for people to think of. And, you know, people a lot of times do sacrifice their future for today and
Hmm.
they don't think about those long term implications of what they're doing today, the easy thing that they're doing today. So that's a very valid point. I hope people listen to that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about helping people build some better eating habits.
Okay.
So are there simple, like low effort ways to improve nutrition without overhauling someone's entire routine?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. And I always say start slow, because if you ever try to overhaul everything all at once, that's that's really too extreme. It takes a really extreme person to do a major makeover like that and keep all of those changes. So, simple things like if you don't necessarily eat big breakfasts or not into that, maybe start with making a smoothie, and that's something simple that you could have in your house, a good protein powder, a good almond or nut butter, and then, a yogurt or a good milk, a nut milk, or, a good, if for those who are lactose intolerant, you can get like it's like a A2 milk that has no lactose in it, or, a regular milk, and then, put you some fresh fruit in there. And, you can make that, and there you're getting your protein, you're getting some dairy, so you have some calcium and some vitamin D, and that's a nice, quick, healthy fortified
Yeah.
protein shake or smoothie, and it's giving you some good calories and some good nutrition. So, you could start off with there, and it'll keep you full for, some
Yeah.
hours and get you started. So that's a good way to start. Make boiled eggs, hard boiled eggs, to have them around the house to snack in. I tell people, if you're not eating a lot, buy some cans of tuna, or, the cans of chicken or the cans of salmon. Because those are going to usually be, packed for the tuna, packed in water, not in oil. But
Yes.
you can drain that, and that's a good protein packed snack, and you can have that with some crackers. You can buy some nuts, have your fruit around, things like that to add to your diet quickly, to just make some little changes, or have those things in the house for when you're hungry, and they're not they're relatively inexpensive,
Yeah.
and you can buy them in bulk and have them there. So, if you're not cooking, or, not apt to cook a lot, that's something easy for you to grab and, have a snack. You can buy some frozen vegetables. They have the green beans, the broccoli, all of those things. I prefer to steam my vegetables than to use the microwave. So, you can still buy that bag and just dump it in your pot, put a little water on it, and steam it for 10 minutes, about 10 minutes, and they're done, and
Yeah.
you have your vegetables. So, little quick things like that. Buy, you can buy a chicken in the meat department, that's already cooked, a rotisserie chicken, or, something like that. So there's all kind of little things for people who, don't cook, who are trying to, start making some little changes to
Yeah.
bring in some foods, to make those small changes, and they don't have to cook, to start, and stop eating out, or, spending that money, and still make the relatively easy exchanges.
Yeah. So you bring up protein powder, which brings up two things that I want to ask you. One is protein powder. There are so many. How on earth is someone to know? I mean, you go to the store and there's just, a whole little section of them. So, what should someone be looking for in purchasing a protein powder? That's the first question. And the second question is, in that same little section, there's all kinds of prepackaged little protein bars and,
Mhm.
all kinds of things. And, sometimes I feel like those are processed food traps that people fall into. So can you just touch on that too?
Absolutely. So yes, they can be. I'll go from the second question first and then go backwards. So
Okay.
yes, the bars absolutely can be traps as well. So, I am a package reader, and a lot of those bars will have a lot of ingredients. So, I always say, if you start seeing 10, 20, 30 ingredients and you cannot read the names, put that bar back down. That is not the
Okay.
bar. That is not the bar for you. If it's one of those bars that, it mostly has nuts, seeds, maybe dates, some honey, or date syrup, something like that. Because date syrup it's still going to be a sweetener, but it's more of a natural sweetener that they're using to
Okay.
sweeten the bar, maybe 5 or 6 ingredients. That's what you're looking for if you're going to use like a bar as a snack every now and again. But yeah, some of those bars in there, they're just sweetened protein bars, and they're just another snack food under the guise of being a protein bar. So, you want to stay away from those. But
Okay.
then with protein powders, yes, it's going to be kind of the same thing. A lot of them, when you read the ingredients, it's going to look lengthier, but it's just because a lot of them will have, depending on what kind you buy, like if you're going to buy a vegan protein powder, it's going to be a little bit more lengthy because it's going to have a lot more like pea protein and some different vegetable blends in it. So the length of the ingredient list will be longer. So, but as
Okay.
long as you're seeing like the fruit and the vegetable blends in it, and then you might see some stevia or some monk fruit, that's okay. So that's what you're looking for. Again, if it's a whey protein powder or an egg white, that's what you're looking for as your main ingredient. And then, if it has a little bit of sweetener, you're looking for either stevia or monk fruit as your, because those are going to be your most natural sweeteners that are going to be plant-based sweeteners. You kind of want
Yeah.
to stay away from, the more like, no, well, they don't really use high fructose corn syrup or anything like that in those, but
Okay.
not sugar, not even the erythritol. You kind of want to stay away from those. But you're looking for, if they do sweeten it, a little bit of stevia or monk fruit. And then,
Got
but if it gets anything longer, you can't really pronounce it. I usually say stay away from those kind of powders and things like that.
So, as a pharmacist, do we see that folks need to be really looking out for foods and the way they interact with the medicines they're taking? When you think about someone who's taking medication for like diabetes or high blood pressure or something like that.
So yes, some foods and medications will have interactions. Definitely for people that are going to be on blood thinners, particularly warfarin. And then there are some, medications that might be used for mood disorders, say bipolar or depression, and some other, heart medications that might have some interactions. So I always tell people, if you're going to start a new medication, you definitely want to, of course, your doctor will, talk to you about it a little bit, but
Yeah.
that's why it's important to have a relationship with your pharmacist because they will, know more closely what those interactions are. So if you're getting ready to start a new medication, have that conversation. And even, when you start talking about over the counter medications, if you're taking a supplement, I always advocate food first for people because that's going to be your best way of getting your nutrients. But I do, understand that people will supplement, with over the counter because sometimes you can't get everything from your food choices. But if you're going to add a supplement, then, we always suggest talking to your pharmacist because there are going to be supplements and herbs that you take over the counter that will interact with your medicine. So you're absolutely going to want to have that conversation with your pharmacist to make sure that they're not interacting or, if you need to space them out to make sure that there's a time lapse between the two.
Got it. That makes sense. And I do hope people are reading those lengthy warnings that come with your medication. Oh my gosh.
Yes, yes, yes.
So let's kind of talk about that. So, reliance upon medications for things like,
Mhm.
diabetes, blood pressure, things like that. Do we see that what you eat can help maybe even not get rid of those, but maybe reduce the amount of medication that you have to take? Give people some
Yes.
hope there.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, well, let's take diabetes, for example. So, diabetes, there's two types. There's type 1 diabetes and there's type 2. So with type 1 diabetes, that's insulin, well, we'll say it's insulin dependent because your body is basically an autoimmune disorder. So your body is not making insulin. So people who have type 1 diabetes, they have to use insulin. So you cannot treat type 1 diabetes with food. So you have to use insulin. But people who have type 2 diabetes, you can treat type 2 diabetes first with treating how you've used your food. So, when you're going to your doctors and they're checking your A1C every year. Now, usually you really don't start getting your A1C checked until you're about in your 40s. They do, sometimes check earlier now because our diets are a lot different than what they
Yeah.
used to be. But generally speaking, we're not checking A1Cs when we're, young adults
Okay.
unless there's a cause for it, something has happened. But once that A1C, if it's elevated, or you might have a fasting blood sugar that's elevated, because when you are getting a yearly exam, they will look at your fasting blood sugar. So if a child has an elevated fasting blood sugar, that might cause the doctor, to do more testing. But when we're looking at that, you can say, this is elevated, and your doctor will say diet and exercise is the key to bringing that back down. And you've been eating a lot of maybe high sugar foods or high carbohydrate foods, that would be the time, to lessen that. And that could start to reverse some of the effects of the high blood sugar or the type 2 diabetes if you've already been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. With high blood pressure, because it can be starting if you've been eating a lot of salt. There's a diet called the DASH diet, but the dietary approach to stopping hypertension. A lot of times they will remove a lot of salt from people's diets to help them with that, in addition to, increasing exercise. Also looking at the Mediterranean diet to help with that. So those are things that you can do to help improve those outcomes and reverse living with, type 2 diabetes or hypertension. So yes, there are absolutely things you can do, to start off, especially if you're
Yeah.
newly diagnosed with those conditions.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what it is that you actually do, because I
Okay.
do want folks to know about that and about um, this as a great alternative. I mean, a lot of people are using these meal delivery services that drop meals at your door, and
Yes.
you still cook them sometimes or heat them or whatever. So let's talk a little bit about what you do and how it can help folks who maybe aren't cooking for themselves, don't want to cook for themselves, or don't want to always cook for themselves, because this is not necessarily every single meal. But let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So I actually I work, my company is called Chefs for Seniors. So we are a national franchise. And so what we actually do is come into our clients' homes and prepare meals for them. So we are 100% customizable based on, dietary needs, any kind of health conditions that they might have. And I will come in and do an in-home consultation with them. So I learn about their likes, their dislikes, what their health conditions are, what their needs are. And once we know that, then we, can determine if we need to come in once a week, once every other week, how frequently we need to come in for them. And then one of our dedicated chefs will, come in, they'll do the grocery shopping for them. We usually come in once a week. We're in there for maybe about 2 hours, prepare all the meals for that week, put them in individual containers, label them, clean up, discuss the meal for the next week. And then all they have to do when we're gone is heat and eat.
Wow. I mean, when you think about that, all that you do for them, it's almost like having your own private chef. So it sounds super expensive. So can your everyday person afford that kind of service?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. We are, we work with every kind of budget, so that is why we are here. That's why we said we come in and do those individual consultations so that, we can discuss with them what their budgets are and what their needs are so that we can work with, each individual client based upon what they need. I also like to tell them if they have a dietitian, we can work alongside their dietitian. So, if they have some kind of specialized diet, we
Yeah.
can work with that as well.
I love that you guys do that, because I do think more people would eat healthy if they had that kind of service.
Hmm.
Um, what about area? I mean, we're a big metroplex. Is there a
Yes.
certain area that you cover?
Yes. So for myself, I do have a pretty big territory. So I'm in the Arlington Grand Prairie area, but that covers, it's not just Arlington Grand Prairie, it's kind of Arlington, Grand Prairie South. It also has Irving. And then I also have Fort Worth. And then I also have Plano, but then we also have 2 other franchises in the DFW area. So if you're not in my territory, I can always direct you to the right franchise.
That's amazing. What about all over the United States? Because people could be listening to this from anywhere. Are there other franchises? Are you guys all
Yes.
over?
Yes, we are. I think we are up to about 90 locations nationwide.
Okay,
We're not in all 50 states, but we are all throughout and we are all internetworked. So I could always, you can go to our website or, if somebody reaches out to me, I can always let them know if we have a location in that area.
great. Okay. And tell everybody again the name of it.
Chefs for Seniors, and that's going to be
Perfect.
chefsforseniors.com.
Perfect. Well, is there any parting wisdom that you want to give folks as we wrap up today?
Yes. I mean, I would just like to tell people, I always like to say, food, nutrition, all of that, it's not one size fits all. And even as we get older, there's still a way to find healthy food and enjoy it. And just take your time but if you need help, look us up. We would love to be that bridge to help you get back on track and find those healthy meals.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with me today. This was a lot of great information. I hope people take something from it, and I hope they reach out to you if they want additional help.
Thank you for having me today, Christy.
Yeah, absolutely.